Give me a few seconds to convince you that not watching this entire video could be the worst decision of your life. Most people think asking questions is the way to keep a conversation going with a woman. But Machiavelli, the man who taught kings how to maintain power, once wrote that those who ask, obey. That's why so many encounters today feel like thinly disguised corporate meetings, cold, predictable, and soulless. The moment you hide behind safe questions like, "What do you do for a living?" you've already lost more than you realize. You've lost the mystery, the dominance, and the tension. And if you don't realize it in time, the spark dies before it even starts. But in this video, I'll show you how to turn any conversation into a field of magnetic attraction. As if Machiavelli himself were right there beside you, guiding you not to win a woman, but to conquer your own kingdom. Get in the flow with me. Machiavelli, in the 16th century, said, "He who asks, obeys." And as much as his work The Prince may seem, at first glance, like a manual of political manipulation, the brutal truth is that it also reveals the workings of social seduction. When you ask, you transfer command. You place yourself in search of validation. It's an invisible but brutal logic. Those who seek information are in an inferior position to those who have the answer. And those who answer, lead. Note, most men begin interactions with women as if they were filling out forms. And the social excuse for this is even more pathetic. "I'm just being polite." As if politeness were enough to make an emotional impact. As if cordiality had the power to generate desire. But you're not there to be well-liked. You're there to be remembered, desired, respected. And that requires risk, not security. Dominance, not hesitation. The problem starts at the base. You've been trained to ask permission. From a young age, you were taught to be the nice guy, the one who doesn't bother, who doesn't get in the way, who doesn't impose. This works in institutional settings, but in the game of attraction, this is a direct route to irrelevance. Because the opposite sex, especially in contexts of conquest, doesn't respond to political correctness. It responds to magnetism, to contrast, to social command. And you don't create magnetism by asking for information. You create magnetism by assuming the narrative. And here comes the first contradiction you need to assimilate if you want to transcend the ordinary. Conversing well isn't about knowing how to ask, it's about knowing how to infer. The difference is profound. Asking is playing it safe. Inferring is exposing yourself. Asking is waiting for her to feed you data. Inferring is proving that you're truly attentive, that you observe, that you interpret, that you have the courage to risk a reading and afford the mistake. And that changes everything. Because where there's risk, there's tension. And where there's tension, desire is born. You're in a bar. She says she works in marketing. You can go with the dead script. Cool, do you enjoy what you do? Or you can sharpen your eyes and play like a prince. You look like you have 3 tabs open on your computer and 37 unanswered WhatsApp notifications, all while pretending you're busy. She might laugh, deny, confirm, or challenge. It doesn't matter. You've created a spark. You've provoked a visceral reaction. You've done something questions never will. You've stirred energy. Now, understand why this works. The human brain is attracted to unexpected stimuli, to broken patterns. Repeated questions are standardized, and every beautiful woman has heard the same 12 questions 1,000 times. But inferences create surprise, and surprise is one of the greatest triggers of emotional attention there is. With each well-placed inference, you show that you're a step above the socially predictable. And what's more, inferring requires presence. And presence is the most valuable currency of seduction. When you infer, you're looking at her, reading signals. You're not waiting for your turn to speak. You're reacting to the now. This puts you in a state of flow where the conversation stops being an interview and becomes a dance, a duel, a living work being written together. Now let's dig deeper. Why does this work psychologically? Because the act of inferring activates a principle called projective mirroring. When you launch into a reading, you seem fed up with your routine. You're mirroring something she may never have verbalized. And when you get it right, the impact is visceral. She feels seen, not for what she says, but for who she is. And that feeling of being understood without having to explain yourself is too rare to ignore. You may not have the strongest body, the most imposing height, or the largest bank account, But if you're the first man to see what she's hiding, you've entered a door most never realized existed. This is why men who aren't aesthetically the most desirable can hypnotize inaccessible women. They don't try to prove their worth with their resume. They activate their worth with perception. They turn the tables. They don't ask for permission to join the conversation. They create the conversation. And here comes another brutally ignored point. Most men don't understand that seduction is emotional entertainment. A woman goes on a date not to answer questions, but to feel alive, surprised, challenged, connected. And if you don't offer that, someone else will. You're replaceable, a walking menu of repetitive questions. And the problem with being generic is that no one feels guilty about forgetting you. But when you enter with inference, with sharp reading, with subtle provocations, with visual metaphors, with phrases that demand an emotional reaction, you become unforgettable. Because you make an impression. You generate a reaction. You create experience. And experience is what fixes memories in the unconscious. This brings us to another key point that Machiavelli accurately anticipated. The power game is won by those who shape perception. He wrote, "Men in general judge more with their eyes than with their hands, for everyone can see, but few can touch." Translated into a social context, most people are guided by the superficial. They react to what's visible, language, behavior, energy. And if you don't master these elements, limit yourself to what's said and responded to, you'll be just another person in the crowd trying to make conversation. And here comes the uncomfortable but liberating part. You don't need her to like you at first. You need her to feel something. Even if it's confusion, provocation, curiosity, mild discomfort, if you've generated an emotion, you've ignited something. And that something can be cultivated. The worst place to be is neutrality. The one where you were nice and died a nice guy. Inference is your way out of neutrality. It's your first strike in the psychological realm. It's where you begin to manipulate tension, and tension is the oxygen of seduction. Shall we go even further? Every conversation is, in essence, a battle of narrative. You either lead or you are led. You either shape the mood or you enter the mood. Either you set the tone or you adapt to whatever comes your way. Seductive men don't talk, they command atmospheres. They don't react, they shape them. When you understand this, stopping asking questions stops being a technique. It becomes an identity revolution. You're no longer the man who wants to please. You become the man who stirs the air, who transforms silence into delicious tension, who sees the invisible and plays with it. Starting today, you no longer enter a conversation trying to be accepted. You enter testing the waters, creating sparks, creating experiences. What if she reacts? Great. If she backs off? Even better. Because this allows you to observe, adjust, and intensify. You don't need approval. You need a playing field. And here's the final key. Stop trying to present yourself. Start revealing yourself little by little, like hiding a map. Women don't want all the answers. They want the journey, the mystery, the dance between what you let slip and what you keep hidden. And this starts at the first contact, when, instead of asking who she is, you suggest joke, take a chance. You're no longer the guy asking questions. You're the man of presence, of the gaze that reads, the speech that provokes, the energy that commands. I'm now going to introduce you to an important concept, the invisible game of tension. How to create impact without saying too much. Understand it this way. Silence, when well managed, speaks louder than any compliment. And in the game of seduction, a man's most common mistake isn't what he says, but the fear he feels of saying nothing. Most men, when talking to a woman they're attracted to, go into a verbal frenzy, a need to fill every second with words, stories, justifications, and of course, the old, safe questions that were already debunked in the previous chapter. The fear of emptiness, the panic of silence, transforms the encounter into a desperate monologue for acceptance. And what was supposed to be seduction becomes a performance. And every performance, when forced, reeks of insecurity. But the strategic man, the one who has studied power, realizes something others ignore. Tension is a more valuable emotional currency than approval. Tension is what's unsaid. It's the space between one word and the next. It's the waiting gaze. It's the pause that weighs heavily. And above all, it's your ability not to rush to fill the void. Tension in the realm of attraction works like an invisible rubber band. The more you stretch, the more energy builds. And the greater the tension, the more explosive the impact when it finally gives way. It's in this space that desire is cultivated. And ironically, it's in this space that most men sabotage themselves. Why does this happen? Because we've been conditioned to avoid discomfort, to believe that when a woman confronts us, disagrees, or remains silent, it's a sign of rejection. But what Machiavelli reveals, and what experienced seducers understand, is that this discomfort is the breeding ground for power. Machiavelli in The Prince presents us with a maxim that deconstructs centuries of social conditioning. It is safer to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. At first, this phrase may sound aggressive, even distorted out of context, but let's decode it within the emotional game. Feared here doesn't mean being authoritarian or cruel. It means being respected. It means occupying emotional space, having a presence that demands attention, being the kind of man who doesn't beg for approval, but imposes himself through the magnetism of his conviction. In conversation, this manifests itself like this. She says something provocative, perhaps a test, perhaps a veiled disagreement, and you don't back down. You don't apologize. You don't change your mind to be accepted. You maintain your frame. This is the crux of the invisible game of tension. A woman isn't seeking agreement, she's seeking resistance. When she disagrees with you, she's testing your frame, testing whether you have your own opinion, testing whether you can maintain emotional control in the face of confrontation. And how you react to this determines whether she sees you as a man or just another man. And herein lies the great contradiction. Attraction doesn't grow in the comfort zone. It's born in the realm of confrontation. If everything you say is met with a passive smile, you're not seducing, you're being ignored. High-value women don't want a mirror. They want a worthy emotional opponent. A man who challenges their certainties, who makes their minds work, who challenges their perceptions. Because a true seducer isn't one who molds himself to her tastes, he's one who expands her world. Imagine the scene. You say something that provokes a slight disagreement. She raises her eyebrow. She says, "Oh, so you're one of those guys who thinks." The average man panics. He tries to justify himself. "No, that's not what I meant." And there, he dies. Not for making a mistake, but for trying to save himself. The rare man, on the other hand, smiles. He looks into your eyes and says with humor, "Maybe I am, but I bet you haven't decided if that's good or bad yet." He doesn't just sustain the frame, he builds tension. He turns a test into a game, a potential crisis into fuel for attraction. He shows that he's not afraid of discomfort, and because of that, he's desired. This is the power of tension. It separates the boys from the men, the insecure from the magnetic, the eager to please from the provocative. Now, let's get to a subtle but crucial point. Don't confuse tension with gratuitous confrontation. Creating tension isn't about being rude or aggressive, it's about being assertive with charm. It's about disagreeing lightly. It's about having a presence that doesn't give in easily but also doesn't attack. It's about walking the fine line between firmness and fluidity. Tension is about contrast. It's when your quiet energy meets an unexpected provocation. It's when your sweetness mixes with boldness. It's when you compliment with a hint of challenge. Example, instead of saying you're beautiful, you say, "You have the kind of beauty that would make a nun question her vocation." You don't just compliment, you create an image. You create tension. You create ambiguity. And ambiguity is gold in seduction. Now stop and reflect. How many times have you tried to create connection by telling her everything she wanted to hear? And how many times has that led you straight to the dead zone of, "You're nice, but..." Being nice is comfortable, but comfort doesn't create a spark. Being understanding is beautiful, but complete understanding kills the mystery. Tension, in turn, requires you to hold the line. That you hold her gaze when she tests you, that you don't apologize for who you are. That you don't fill every second with words, but let silence do the dirty work. And speaking of silence, that is the seducer's greatest ally. Well-placed silence creates anticipation. It shows that you're comfortable with your own time, that you don't need to fill the void to feel accepted, that you're not afraid of being interpreted. Silence shows power. And as Machiavelli stated, power isn't about strength, it's about perception. Whoever masters tension, masters perception. And perception is what determines desire. Because women don't want the most logical, the most coherent, or the most predictable. They want what makes them feel. And tension, well managed, makes them feel. Now let's talk about an emotional mechanism few understand: the escalation of emotional tension. Every conversation has a turning point, a moment where you can intensify or dissipate desire. And that moment usually comes after the first challenge, the first discomfort, the first test. If you sustain the tension there, even with humor, with lightness, the attraction curve grows exponentially. You leave the lukewarm territory and enter the real game. The conversation becomes an elegant duel, a ping-pong of glances, laughter, and provocation. Her body changes, her gaze shifts, interest is born. But if you give in at this point, if you try to fix it, soften it, justify it, the tension evaporates, and with it, desire. Machiavelli, if he were alive today, would have said, "It is not the most gentle who conquers, it is he who dominates the invisible space between words." Because deep down, what every woman wants to feel is this: this man isn't trying to please me, he's being himself, and yet I'm fascinated. That's real tension, that's power. And that power isn't in the content of what you say, it's in the subtext. In the way you his gaze, in the pause before you respond, in the smile that hides something unsaid, in the compliment that carries a hint of danger. You're not just a man talking, you're a universe of possibilities. And tension is allowing her to feel this without you having to explain. That's why the game of seduction isn't won by eloquence, it's won by the courage to remain silent, by the ability to disagree with class, by the boldness to provoke and laugh, by the mastery of turning confrontation into dance. And in the end, when she's alone, replaying each moment, she won't remember your words. She'll remember the tension, the chills, the doubt, the feeling that there was something there she couldn't decipher. You can have the best script, the perfect line, the perfect timing. But if your presence is shallow, you'll be forgotten. Worse, you'll be ignored before you're even heard. In the game of seduction and social influence, presence isn't a detail. It's the secret weapon that differentiates an ordinary man from a man who magnetizes a room. And the most brutal part? Most men today are completely unarmed. We're in an era where bodies are present, but souls are not. Men live in zombie mode, slumped posture, floating gaze, slurred voice, fragmented attention. Even when face-to-face with the woman of their dreams, they're more concerned with performing correctly than with fully existing. And that's precisely why most fail before even the first word. True presence isn't theatricality. It's not forced intensity. It's a kind of emotional gravity, an inner silence that transforms even a simple hello into something you feel. Men who are present don't need to say much because everything they say is charged with intention. And intention, this invisible entity, is what transforms a simple gesture into something sexual. Think of an actor like Marlon Brando in his best roles. He didn't need to raise his voice, he didn't need to smile, he was just there. Totally. And that made everyone around him respond to his energy. It wasn't constructed charisma, it was embodied charisma. And this kind of presence stems from a deep understanding. You're not trying to win anyone over, you're allowing them to notice you. Look closely at this sentence. Most men enter an interaction trying to prove something. They show off their work, their car, their intelligence, their good humor, as if they were in a perpetual entrance exam for acceptance. But a man who is present doesn't prove. He reveals, gradually, paused, with subtext, with layers. Because the secret is this: you're not interesting when you strip completely naked in the first minute. You become magnetic when you generate curiosity. When, with each word, there's a hint that suggests more, but doesn't give everything away. It's like a rare perfume, strong enough to be felt, yet subtle enough to leave doubt in the air. You dominate not by what you offer, but by what you don't immediately deliver. And here comes an essential concept that few discuss: emotional rhythm. How you manage your own energy determines the impact you have on others. A man who arrives hurried, talkative, trying to impress, reveals anxiety. A man who arrives serene, observant, who listens before speaking, who measures each word with the precision of a sculptor, creates presence, creates atmosphere, creates respect. And this cadence isn't just aesthetic, it's neurological. The human brain synchronizes rhythms. When you enter with a more centered energy, you slow down the other person's mind. You create contrast with the hustle and bustle of the external world. You become an emotional oasis. And this, in the world of attraction, is as powerful as beauty or status. Now here's the brutal paradox. The more present you are, the less you have to do. Most men are exhausted because they try so hard to seduce. They talk too much, tell long stories, overcompliment, laugh unintentionally, and gesticulate wildly. But all of this stems from fear. Fear of not being accepted. Fear of not being remembered. The present man, on the other hand, understands that those who are at peace with themselves don't need to be approved by others. They enter a room unhurriedly. They're not anxious to present their best selves. Because they already know that, simply by being whole, they're rarer than 99% of the men that woman met that week. And this brings us to one of Machiavelli's most overlooked quotes, and one of his most profound. To everyone's eyes, every man appears what he pretends to be. Few truly know what he is. Presence is exactly that, the art of showing little with great intention. It's knowing that impact isn't in the volume of speech, but in the silence between one sentence and the next. It's understanding that more than being heard, you need to be felt. And what prevents most men from achieving this presence? Internal fragmentation. The disconnect between what they think, feel, and do. They're always one foot in fear, the other in expectation. Thinking about what she'll think, what they might lose, what they should say. This internal noise prevents energy from flowing. And the woman feels it. She may not even know why, but she feels it. This man isn't here. He's trying to be. The true seducer, on the other hand, is in a state of play. He's not concerned with conquering. He's enjoying provoking. He's not nervous about the reaction. He's curious about the impact. He doesn't seek control. He dances with the chaos of the interaction. And for that, he trains himself. Yes, presence is trained. It's not talent. It's choice. It's practice. Breathing, attention, posture, intention. Being here now. Feeling your own breath, your own body. Observing the environment without judgment. Allowing the moment to pass through you without rushing to respond. Do you want to be unforgettable? Then listen with your eyes. Speak with your body. And silence with intention. When you do this, even your pause becomes art. Your laughter becomes a command. Your gaze becomes a touch. You transcend the conversation and become an experience. And the experience is what she'll tell her friends the next day. He was different. I don't know what it was, but it was intense. That's presence. That's impact. That's what Machiavelli would call invisible power. And the best part? Few men will have this, because it requires inner work. It requires silence with your own demons. It requires giving up the performance habit, and that's scary. But you didn't come this far to be just another one. You came this far because you want to be remembered. Not for what you have, but for what you create. And the good news is, when you master presence, you don't have to chase women. You just need to enter the room. The rest will happen. True attraction begins in silence. It grows in tension. And it explodes when you're so present, so comfortable in your own skin, that a woman feels, without you even telling her, that she's dealing with someone unlike anything she's ever known. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real. Strategically real. And if you've made it this far, you're already ahead of 98% of men who continue to live on autopilot. But if you want to go further, if you want direct access to the most forbidden, sharp, and effective strategies of modern seduction, packed into a practical, brutally honest system applicable to any interaction with women, then you need to know what I'm about to reveal to you. The Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds, isn't just an audiobook. It's a mental boot camp, an activation code, an invisible weapon that unlocks conversations, creates instant desire, and transforms you into an architect of emotional impact. Created for men who understand that the game has changed, and who don't have time for superficial theories, this manual brings together the most powerful triggers in the psychology of attraction, field tests, and verbal structures that work in seconds.